It's time to cook with Susan Beck, and I have more cucumbers than I hardly know what to do with. So today I am going to make dill pickles, and I have searched for many years to find a dill pickle recipe that I really like, where I feel like the pickles do stay somewhat crisp. And so I am going to make my favorite pickle recipe today called crisp dill pickles. And a little alum goes into that. That's a spice that is supposed to help keep things from getting quite as mushy and soggy. We're going to use a few mustard seeds. I've got some garlic from my garden, and I have some dill from my garden. We're going to add that into the jars along with some water, vinegar, and kosher salt that I will bring to a boil. Already in my pot, I have 10 cups of water, 5 cups of white vinegar, although I don't have very much, but in the past I have used apple cider vinegar. Use whichever you would like, and 1/2 cup of kosher salt. That will make our brine. If you're new to canning, I would suggest starting with things that just require a hot water bath. I am using my pressure canner here just because it has a nice flat bottom and it holds 7 different quarts, and I can do them all in one batch. But any type of big pot would work. You just need to cover the jars with water, and you usually hot water bath for 10 minutes. So jams and pickling things are 2 things that I do in a hot water bath. And did you know you can pickle a lot of things besides just cucumbers? You can pickle beets, you can pickle green beans, you can pickle jalapenos or banana peppers. And my grandma even used to pickle the watermelon rinds. Having everything ready to go really is important in making the process go smoothly. So this container is full of enough water to hot water bath that when I put the jars in, the water will rise over my quart jars. I have, again, my 10 cups of water, 5 cups of vinegar, and 1/2 cup of kosher salt ready to come to a boil. And in this back little bowl or saucepan, I'm going to put in my canning lids. I like to get that little rubber part a little bit softened up. So I usually put them in kind of flip-flopping some top and bottom. So we're going to go ahead and start that burner and get those warming up. And we're going to start this front burner, and we want to get this to a boil so that that salt will dissolve. I'm going to add a lid to help that get to a boil more quickly, and we will also turn on the flame under our big pot. We'll need canning rings. We will need 1 for each jar, and then as you already saw, I have my vegetables and spices ready to go. One of the things that makes canning pickles so easy is they just need a quick little scrub underneath some cool water, and I usually kind of rub my hands across them to take off some of those little prickly, bumpy parts. You might see the steam rising, but the first preparation step is to get your quart jars nice and hot. So I've had mine in the dishwasher, and I am now getting ready to fill them. So I just pulled 4 jars out. I'm just going to work with a few jars at a time because I like to keep my jars hot. And into each of those jars, I am going to put some dill, a garlic clove. I'm going to put in some mustard seed, a teaspoon of that, and 1/2 teaspoon of the alum. We'll repeat that with all these jars. In goes the dill, in goes the garlic, in goes 1/2 teaspoon of alum, and a full teaspoon of mustard seeds. I like to put them in the bottom first because sometimes I forget, and then the jar's so full of the cucumbers I can't hardly fit in the spices. Now I noticed that my lids have come to a rolling boil, so I'm just going to turn those lids off and let them just sit in that warm water until we're ready to put a canning lid on the top of each of these jars. I'm going to set these to the side for a second. I am going to start by filling as many of these as I can with whole pickles. My family really prefers the whole pickles because the whole ones tend to stay a little bit crisper. I think the more you cut them, the less crisp they are when you are done. So I am going to do most of these as whole. But some of these bigger ones I'm going to cut into spears. You can also do slices, but I don't usually do that because I guess you're just increasing your surface area when you do that, and there's just that much more opportunity for the pickle to not be quite as crisp. Now, I usually just cut off one end of these. I only need to cut off the end that was attached to the vine. See if I can get that one to, it's a curvy one, fit down in the jar. My smallest ones filled 2 jars. Notice that I try to make sure they are down below the top of this glass. If you can get them a 1/2 inch below, that's probably good. Then I'm going to turn the rest of these into spears. Now again, I need them to be below the top of that jar, so I might trim a little bit more off the end. And I just try to stand those spears upright in my jar. So again, take off the side that was attached to the vine, and I don't know, 4 spears out of these nice long cucumbers seems to be about right today. I avoid using really big fat cucumbers. I don't like them when they start to get really seedy. Those are great food for my chickens. I just really try to watch my cucumbers to avoid letting them get that big. But if they do and you don't have chickens, I'd put them in your compost pile. This water is boiling, so I'm going to keep the lid on and turn the heat off. Then I've got all my pickle jars as full as I can. Notice how I've really just wedged them down in there as tightly as possible. I got 7 quarts today. You should have enough brine probably for 8 quarts if you have packed your jars tightly. It's time to fill the canning jars that have all of our cucumbers in them with that salt and vinegar brine. So I just use a measuring cup that I can dip in, being careful not to get my hand down in that brine. And I pour it over the top until I reach the top of my pickles, which should be about 1/2 inch from the top of the jars. So we do want those pickles completely covered. The pickles will shrink down a bit when they're in that hot water bath, but I try to get the pickles underwater with a little gap before we reach the top of the jar. I want to remove any moisture that might have gotten in there, or if there's any little salt crystal or anything that would prevent my jars from sealing. This should take care of that problem. Okay, they're all wiped. It's time to put on a lid. So I just use a tongs and pull each of those lids out of that hot water. Remember, those were heated in a little saucepan to get the rubber part softened up a bit. These two are stuck together here, which often happens. All right, and on each of these go. Once I have those all covered, then I use a canning ring and I tighten this on as best I can with my hands. And then when I get ready to put them in, I usually tighten one more time. As I move each jar to the canner, I just make sure I tighten down the ring just a little bit more. Now, if these are hot, because like when I make jam and things, sometimes they're much hotter than this, and you just use a towel or a pot holder as you move them over. Now, I'm finding that mine are about ready to go underwater, so I can't really be reaching my hand down in there very safely anymore. So this is a wonderful gadget if you are going to can. You can just use a regular tongs, but it's difficult. This has a little round edge that fits really nicely around each of the canning tops. And now I can lower those down in. And in my canner, 7 jars are all that fit when I'm using a quart size jar. I can get 8 or 9 pint sized jars in here. But I won't begin timing my hot water bath until the water comes to a boil. It's going to be a 10-minute boiling hot water bath. And I have just a little layer of water over the top of each of those lids, probably 1/2 inch. If you found that you didn't have enough water in your kettle, just add some. It'll take a little longer for them to come up to boiling, but it'll be just fine. One last tip, if you set the lid on the top, you can help bring that to a boil more quickly. My 10-minute hot water bath is complete, and I don't really want to leave these pickles in the hot water any longer than that. I need the jars to seal, but the hot water is really what causes them to not be crisp anymore. So now I want to get them out of this hot water, and this is where those canning tongs are just incredible for this job, because I don't have to worry about my jars slipping. Those little curved edges just match up nicely with the top of the canning jar. All right, those need to cool, but I have a jar left over from last year that we're going to taste. So here's a jar that was left over from last year that we haven't eaten yet. I don't know if you can hear that in the video, but it crunches when I bite it. That pickle is still on the crunchy side, and that's what I'm looking. Give these crisp dill pickles a try. Check out my links to strawberry rhubarb jam, strawberry jam, and pickled beets that I'll put in the description below, because all those were made with just a hot water bath, a simple way to get started with canning. And be sure to subscribe to Time to Cook with Susan Beck. For the best taste, be sure to wait several weeks before trying your canned pickles.